100メガショックネオジオ。
その噂は本当なのか。 SNK 歴代の人気キャラが総登場。ゲーマー待望夢のチームバトル The King of Fighters XIV
SNK。
Hello everyone and welcome back to Player One Start. Today is a spin-off video of what I've been doing for a little while on this channel, and that is the Ultimate Neo Geo review. I didn't feel it was fair to include so much detail on just one game series, as I didn't do that in any of the other videos in this series, and I really felt like this should be its own dedicated subject. Today we're going to talk about the fighting game series, the King of Fighters, specifically the ones that were released for the Neo Geo, AES, MVS, and I believe most of them, if not all of them, ended up on the Neo Geo CD as well. I would almost go so far as to say that this is the premier fighting game series that was released on the Neo Geo hardware. And because of its notability on that console, I felt it was necessary to actually go through and see what was this game series all about. And I don't think there's any place better to start than the first one. Let's go ahead and take a look.
The King of Fighters is a series of fighting games by SNK that began with the release of The King of Fighters in 1994. The series was originally developed for SNK's Neo Geo MVS arcade hardware, and in turn for the AES. This would serve as the main platform for the series until 2004, when SNK retired the Neo Geo hardware in favor of their Atomisware arcade board. The game series story focuses on the title tournament, where fighters from multiple SNK games compete. SNK also created original characters to serve as protagonists from each of their story arcs, while still interacting with fighters from The Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury, among others. According to an interview with veteran designers of the King of Fighters series, the first prototype version of the game was a Double Dragon-style side-scrolling beat-em-up called Survivor. It would only use characters from the Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury series, specifically allowing players to play as Robert Garcia and Terry Bogard for location testing. However, that idea was eventually abandoned. Since SNK were attached to the idea of the two series crossover, they eventually agreed to make their idea into a fighting game. Characters from Akari Warriors and Psycho Soldier were also added to the roster. The concept of a three-man team was also one of the ideas kept from the side-scrolling version. The title, The King of Fighters, was reused from the subtitle of the first Fatal Fury game, called Fatal Fury: King of Fighters. The first entry in this game series would be The King of Fighters 94. It was released by SNK on August 25th, 1994, and it featured characters from SNK's previous fighting game series, previously mentioned as Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting. The basic gameplay of King of Fighters 94 is similar to SNK's previous games. Again, not wanting to stray away too far from the Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting series, but also took influence from Samurai Shodown. The game uses a 4-attack button configuration that consists of Light Punch, Light Kick, Strong Punch, and Strong Kick. Specialized techniques are performed by pressing button combinations, allowing the player to dodge an opponent's attack, or to launch a character's powerful knockdown attack. As with most other fighting games of the time, each character has a set of basic, unique, and special moves that can be performed by the player with a specific series of joystick and button inputs. Each character has a power gauge at the bottom of the screen, which charges when the character is blocking or taking attacks. Once the power gauge is filled, the player's basic attacks become stronger for a short period. When the characters are in this state, their players can also perform the character's special move, which immediately consumes the entire power gauge. King of Fighters 94 contributed to the fighting game genre by replacing a traditional round-based format used in games prior to this title with a format consisting of 3-on-3 team-based matches named the Team Battle System. Instead of choosing a single character, the player selects from one of 8 available teams, each consisting of 3 members. Before the match, the player chooses the order in which their team members will enter the battle. When the match begins, the members chosen to go first on their respective teams will fight. When one character is defeated, the following member of the same team will take his or her place. If a character is losing a match against an opponent, then the player can call one of the remaining teammates standing on the sidelines to jump in and perform a support attack. The match ends when all 3 team members of either side loses. Upon its release, the King of Fighters 94 was well received, with reviews praising the deep combat system and the matchup of fighters from different SNK franchises. The inability to choose team lineups in team battle mode was a common complaint among critics though. However, that didn't stop Electronic Games Monthly from awarding King of Fighters 94 as the best fighting game of 1994, as well as the best Neo Geo game of that year.
So one thing I think about the King of Fighters 94 is that it is definitely the first in the series, but it is not necessarily the best. I've seen this game in a lot of places, and in fact it's not really too expensive to collect, but I think the reason why people want to collect this title is because it is the first in a larger series of games, and not necessarily because this is the best in the series, but you should always have the first, at least in my opinion. So overall, I do find the King of Fighters 94 to be a decent fighting game, and if this was the only King of Fighters game to be released on the Neo Geo, I think it may have gotten lost as it would have blended into many of the other fighting games on there. True, the 3v3 concept was innovative for the time, but I feel like by the end, there were other games that were doing similar innovations and possibly even surpassed this game. I think it's also worth noting that this is the only one that I have in my collection that is original on the Neo Geo AES. The rest I'll be playing off of my multi-cart or the Neo Geo SD cart.
The success of King of Fighters 94 led SNK to release yearly installments for the series, numbering the games for the year they were released. That said, the following year, in 1995, the King of Fighters 95 was released, adding new characters, as well as beginning the series' first story arc entitled The Orochi Saga. In response to criticisms of the first game, it was also the first game in the series that allowed the players to create their own 3-member teams with any character in the game. On a side note, this would also be the first game in the series to be ported to other home consoles besides the Neo Geo line of systems, with a release on the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. The game features a similar cast to King of Fighters 94, with the exception of the USA team, which was replaced by the Rival Team. The plot features a new King of Fighters tournament being held the following year after the first tournament. One of the main focuses on the creation of King of Fighters 95 was the introduction of the Rivals team, most notably Yori, who became one of the favorite characters from the staff. The game received mixed reviews from various video game publications. Some complained about the response from the controls and the long loading times from other console ports, notably the PlayStation. However, the introduction from the enhanced version of Rugal, as well as differences between all of the characters, have been noted to be one of the best parts from the game.
So So the King of Fighters 95 is a good game. It is a worthy successor to the original. But one thing I don't really like about this game, or at least I didn't really get interested in, was the storyline. But to tell you the truth, stories are not the reason why I play fighting games. I play them because it's quick action, you can dive right in, it's simple to play and yet difficult to master. I really do like that kind of gameplay style of the fighting games on the Neo Geo, and when it's done well, it pays off, and I do feel like it was done well in King of Fighters 95, but the storyline was not enough to keep me interested in it. Again, I'm sure there's a great lore behind all this, and if I did a little bit more research, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, that's what these characters are, and yeah, this is what happens here, but that's not the reason why I play fighting games for me personally, so that's not really something that's going to make me get drawn back to this game.
Of fighting to come again. As the year flew by from the excitement, now declare the opening of our special team tournament begins.
In 1996.
King of Fighters 96 established the second part of the Orochi saga. The unique feature of the game is that depending on playable characters chosen on a team, an exclusive ending could be played. A few changes made to the gameplay included new techniques, various changes of some teams, with a few of them introducing new characters. The plot was nothing new, basically following a new King of Fighters tournament. But what's interesting about this game is the fact that the SNK staff had various troubles with development of this game as it dragged on right up until its scheduled release. During production of this game, developers had difficulties with making the sprites and special moves of the new characters in the game. And that may have led to some of the reviews of this game, as I've seen it all over the board with mixed reception from video game publications. Some reviewers praised the graphical improvements and the addition of new characters, while some commented it was unbalanced in comparison to its prequels. To be honest, as I'm playing these games in order, I don't really find too much new about this game to keep me coming back to this one. And unless I was going for a complete collection of all the Neo Geo games, in other words being a millionaire, I wouldn't make it a point of collecting this one.
Now, I'm going to say something here that may be a bit controversial, because I've seen a lot of people who really do adore this game, but I am not a big fan of King of Fighters 96. And by saying that, I'm not saying it's a bad game. I'm saying that if you played 94, 95, or 96, you're pretty much going to get a similar gameplay experience. Yeah, they make some tweaks and some changes, different character rosters, different stories. But for me, it doesn't go much beyond just creating another game in the series. And this did not leave a good impression for me, at least in these first three. I do believe that things were slightly improved in each game, but back in the day, keep in mind, each of these would have cost you hundreds of dollars a pop, and with that perspective, I wouldn't have been motivated to buy any more of these at that point. But thankfully, King of Fighters 97 would set things a little bit more in the right direction.
King of Fighters 97 follows the same format as the previous King of Fighter games, and concluded the first series story arc, the Orochi Saga. This game introduces two distinct playing styles which the player can select before choosing their team. They are Advanced and Extra. Advanced mode is based on the previous games in the series, but features a revamped power gauge. Instead of charging the power gauge, it is now filled whenever the player strikes an opponent or by performing special moves. The player can stock up to 3 power gauges, and can use one of their power gauges in stock to perform a special move or enter a max mode, in which the player's defensive and offensive strength are increased. Performing a special move while in max mode will make the player perform a more powerful special move. To be honest, this one took me a little bit to get used to, but once I did, I ended up enjoying this playstyle quite a bit. If you choose Extra mode, this is based on the first 2 games in the series, King of Fighters 94 and 95. Like in those games, the power gauge fills up by charging it or by defending against the opponent's attack. And since I'm more of an offensive player, this is not one that I enjoyed playing as. After the gauge is filled, the player enters max mode, just like in Advanced. Their character's offense and defense will increase. In this mode, the player can only perform a special move in max mode or when their life gauge is near empty and flashing red. In order to decide who would become members of the 1997 Special Team, 3 polls were conducted by video game journals Weekly Famitsu, Gamist, and Neo Geo Freak that had readers vote on who they wanted to see in the team. This game ended up being well received by critics and gamers alike, doing well in arcades in Japan and doing well on the AES, selling over 19,000 copies in its first week, according to Famitsu. Now, while I wouldn't go so far as to say that this is the definitive version of the Orochi Saga, I do like the fact that you can choose between 2 different types of modes that are seemingly improved versions of the previous title's gameplay. While I did enjoy 95, if I had to recommend one out of this Orochi Saga, I would say 97 is probably going to be the one you want to get.
So as I said just a little bit ago, I do believe the King of Fighters 97 is a step in the right direction. It doesn't quite get things down to a T yet, or it's in that sweet spot to where I thoroughly enjoy it, but I do enjoy the fact that they decided to split off into 2 different gameplay modes. That is something to keep this franchise from getting stale. One thing that was personally a treat for me is the fact that they created a gameplay mode that perfectly fits my gameplay style. And I think you can kind of break it down into this. Either you're an offensive player where you're constantly trying to hit someone else, or you're a defensive player where you're trying to outwit them and block as many attacks as you can while getting a few good jabs in here or there. And I am definitely more of the offensive player. The King of Fighters 98 is listed as one of the best fighting games in this series, and one of the best fighting games of all time. I have seen a lot of fans adore this game, and I have to say I'm buying into it. Out of the first games in this series, this one is my favorite so far. I think the large roster of characters, and the fact that they just got rid of the storyline and focused on improving the gameplay that much more, really got me into this game. And I found it hard to walk away from this one and move on to another game when I'm like, well, why do I want to keep going when this one really seems to get it down perfect? I wasn't really sure how they were going to be able to improve upon this.
Say that shit like you just got your motherfucker.
It all began in 94, kept on rolling in 95, square place in 96, it came to an end in 97, and now it goes, and here we go. KOF is here again. Nothing's gonna stop since 1998.
This is King of Fighters 98, and unlike previous game in the series, this game did not feature a story. Instead, it was promoted as a, quote, dream match game that would allow players to choose most of the characters available from the previous titles, including ones that were supposedly dead. I guess fighting video games are just like science fiction movies. No one's ever really truly dead, are they? It was advertised by SNK as a special edition of the series, as it featured most of the characters who had appeared in the previous games from 1994 until 1997. The gameplay is pretty similar to King of Fighters 97, with the player having the choice between 2 playing styles, Advanced and Extra. In this game, when a character loses a round, the losing team is given a handicap in its favor. In Advanced mode, this means that the player can stock an additional power gauge, and in Extra mode, the time that it takes to charge up one's power gauge to maximum level is shortened, and the maximum health requirement for a max special move is also increased. Overall, I would say that this game is probably my favorite in the entire series. Throughout my research and live plays of these games on stream, I have constantly been told that King of Fighters 98 would be one to try out, as I see it as also a big fan favorite. However, if you didn't want to spend the extra money to get it on a Neo Geo, it was also ported to things like the Dreamcast, as the King of Fighters Dream Match 1999, which included 3D backgrounds, but it has also been ported to consoles like the PlayStation 2. And I think the last one I played it on was actually mobile phones. But in terms of essential Neo Geo collecting, I would definitely say to give this one a pickup if you can.
Again, the King of Fighters is a good game. I think that they took things that worked out of the last two games and just kind of kept improving it on here. But one thing I think kind of holds it back for me is they put a little bit more emphasis, I think, on story, starting a new story arc in this game. Again, that's not something that would really appeal to me in a fighting game. And if they were going to try to get me to keep paying for these games year to year, I think that it probably wouldn't work. But in an arcade setting, I think this would be fine. I think that if you upgraded the game with different rosters, different characters, I think I would be a little upset that I wasn't getting the same experience I got back in King of Fighters 98, at least in terms of being able to select all the different characters in all the previous games. But I think they do a little bit more to perfect the gameplay style that they were kind of hammering out over 97 and 98. So the King of Fighters 98 actually got a release on the Sega Dreamcast, and I have that game as well. This is the Japanese version, because I have a Japanese Dreamcast. And this is the King of Fighters Dream Match 1999, but it came out a year after it, but this is a port of the King of Fighters 98. I believe there are a few changes to this game, but it should be the same gameplay experience that you had with that game. And to tell you the truth, this is the one I find myself playing the most often out of this series, even still to this day. I really like that I was able to get this for this console. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it for the Neo Geo proper, but it does provide a good gameplay experience even still to this day, and I would definitely recommend picking it up if you can get it for any system. It's also been ported to things like, I think the PlayStation 2 got a version, PSN, and I think the last time I ended up playing it was on mobile phones.
Having to follow the King of Fighters 98 would not have been an easy task in my opinion, but SNK did it with the King of Fighters 99 Millennium Battle. This game would introduce the Nests Chronicles story arc, which is centered around a young man named K, who is formerly associated with a mysterious yet threatening organization known only as Nests. This game also introduces several changes to the established King of Fighters format, most notably an assisting character labeled Striker. This person would be able to aid the team for a few seconds in combat. Instead of the 3 character teams from earlier King of Fighters games, each team now has 4 members. Before a match, the player chooses 3 of the characters to use in fights, and the 4th member will become the Striker that the player summons during battle to help their character by performing one of their special moves against an opponent. A Striker can only be summoned a limited number of times during a single match, and this is determined by the number of strike bombs that are displayed at the bottom of the screen. The selectable fighting styles, advanced from extras from the King of Fighters 98 and before, have been removed. Instead, the game has a single playing style modeled after the advanced mode from previous games, where the player fills their power gauge by attacking the opponent or performing special moves. And I have to say, thank goodness this is the mode that they chose going forward, because I was not a fan of the extra mode. This time around, there are 2 powered states that the player can choose during battle depending on the button combination used. Counter mode increases the player's offensive strength and allows them unlimited use of the character's special move. The other powered-up mode is Armor mode, which increases the character's defensive strength, allowing them to take more damage from the opponent. However, the player cannot use special moves while in Armor mode. With the introduction of a new lead character, K, SNK had originally planned to remove main characters Kaio and Yori. Instead, they ended up as unlockable hidden characters after fans negatively responded to their removal at location testing of the game. The King of Fighters 99 was very popular after its release. Again, according to Famitsu, both the AES and Neo Geo CD versions sold well over 10,000 copies each in their first week on the market. In GameSpot's article, The History of SNK, the author noted that King of Fighters 99 Evolution was one of the best fighting games on the Dreamcast along with Garou Mark of the Wolves. Various video game publications have also commented on this game. While the fighting system was well received, critics had mixed feelings about the Striker system. Overall, I personally feel that this game is well done, and they definitely took a lot of risks with changing the established format of the King of Fighters series. But since I'm not too involved in the storyline of these games, I'm just going to say that the gameplay style is what's going to draw me to it, and honestly, I think this one is very well done. Another worthy pickup, but I still somehow find myself liking the King of Fighters 98 just a little bit better.
I can see how this game could be divisive to some because of their departure of that gameplay style that a lot of people got used to in the 97 and 98 formats. But to tell you the truth, I see really no other way to keep the game series advancing than trying to make those changes and seeing if players will buy into it.
The King of Fighters 2000 is the second part of the Nests saga. And although it is jumping ahead a little bit on SNK's history, it should be noted that this was the last game produced by SNK in the series before its bankruptcy. The reason this is worth mentioning now is that I believe that this resulted in several glitches and bugs remaining in the game because several staff members left the company before the game was complete. The game does add a couple of new playable characters and a couple of new strikers, most of them from earlier King of Fighters titles, but there were some from other titles such as Metal Slug and the Kaizuna Encounter. The gameplay is mostly the same as the previous game, but the assisting character, known as the striker, can also cooperate with the playable character to generate combos. Critical reception for this game has been mostly positive since its release. GameSpot said that SNK improved most of the problems with the King of Fighters 99 by adding gameplay features such as new attacks and new additions to the striker system. However, the game's graphics drew mixed reactions. While some enjoyed the character designs, backgrounds, and theme songs, some said these elements appeared dated due to similarities with previous installments and the improved graphics that were coming out with newer consoles around the year 2000. In my opinion, this game didn't really stick out to me too much. In fact, I personally didn't really see this as keeping up in line with the rest of the King of Fighters series, and until I actually researched it and found out some of the development issues with it, I didn't know exactly why, but this doesn't really feel like, to me, as a typical King of Fighters game should. To me, it just feels a bit more generic, like other fighting games that are on the system, so it's not really something I could get into. Again, unless you're a billionaire going for the complete collection, I would say you can skip this one.
Out of all of the games in the series that I've played so far, the King of Fighters 2000 really, to me, feels like just a generic fighting game. I previously said there's no bad games in this series, and I do agree with that statement, even still with King of Fighters 2000, but I don't really see anything here that would keep me drawn to not only this game, but this series in general. I may be way off base here, but that was just my personal feeling. I don't really know if I can put it into words. Now, I may be rubbing some fans the wrong way by saying that King of Fighters 2000 just seems like another generic fighting game to me, but it's just the feeling I got while playing this game. I didn't really find anything unique or special about it, and now that I've had better gameplay experiences with other games in this franchise already, I don't think I would be playing this one as much as I would be going back and playing some of the other ones I like better, notably 98.
The King of Fighters 2001 ends the second story arc of the Nests saga. Thank goodness, because that for some reason was hard for me to say. Due to development issues of the last game and many employees leaving SNK, this would be the first game where the Korean company Yolif and the company Brezasoft, which was composed of former SNK employees, would help develop the game after SNK declared bankruptcy. Again, the battles are between teams of 4, but instead of a strict 3 fighters and 1 striker format, this installment introduces the Tactical Order system, which would allow the player to select which characters they will control in combat and which will serve as strikers. This game again did fairly well in Japan, with, according to Famitsu, selling over 6,000 copies in its first week on the market on the AES. However, it was towards this time where this format was beginning to show its age, with the PlayStation 2 port of the game selling over 39,000 units in that same time frame. Critics of the game gave the Neo Geo port of the game around 8 to 9 out of 10, praising the balance with the cast and the striker system, but criticized the high difficulty of the boss Ignis. Overall, I found this game to be up to the standard of the rest of the series and definitely better than King of Fighters 2000, but overall I just kept hoping for another game like King of Fighters 98.
So in King of Fighters 2001, they actually did push forward the gameplay style that they've been trying to hammer out the last few years a little bit more. By this time, though, think about 2001. New consoles were coming out. 3D was actually looking a bit more acceptable, at least in my opinion. The 2D pixel art sprite-based fighting games that we grew up playing in the mid-90s were starting to go by the wayside, and I think that this game was starting to look dated with 2001. I think if I wanted to see another game in this series, I would want to see a game like 1998, but including some of the new characters, rosters, and gameplay styles that they had in these other games that came out since 1998, and I would like to see them kind of redo that as a series as a whole. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what they did.
The King of Fighters 2002 was the second game to be produced by Eolith and developed by Playmore, which was formerly Brezasoft. So it's kind of interesting that Playmore would go hand in hand with SNK from here on out, as it was comprised of many employees that left SNK after its bankruptcy. This game was created to reunite old characters from previous King of Fighter games, as well as featuring no story, similar to King of Fighters 98. This game removed the 4-on-4 striker match format that was used in the previous 3 games, and returns to the classic 3-on-3 battle format, originally used in the series up until King of Fighters 98. The game also revamped the power gauge system into a format similar to the one used in King of Fighters 97, and in turn 98. This game would also be ported to the Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Critical reception to the game was very positive due to its large number of playable characters, although there were mixed opinions given to its aging graphics scheme, as they were still using the classic Neo Geo hardware, which at this point was 12 years old. I have personally seen this game listed as a fan favorite of the games released on the Neo Geo, and is highly sought after by collectors of the system. So in terms of collecting it for yourself, I would say, really, if you like any of the games, King of Fighters 98 will be good, but this game actually almost serves as a farewell to every single game that came along before it, and would have been a great send-off for this game series on the Neo Geo had this been the last game in the series. Overall, I did find this game fun, and I would personally want to get it myself, along with King of Fighters 98, saying that those are the two to have. But again, this is coming from my initial impression of these games, because I didn't grow up playing these fighting games. It's just something I fell in love with as I was playing them on this console in modern times.
The King of Fighters 2002 is a great game for a couple of reasons. At a time where this would have seemed like the most dated concept in the world, another sprite-based, pixel art-driven, 2D fighting game being released again just doesn't really seem like something that a lot of audiences would have been interested in. But including many of the characters from 1994 to 2001, was a great way to say farewell to this game genre. In my opinion, the King of Fighters 2002 should have been the last game on the Neo Geo hardware. It was a great fanfare and farewell for this type of fighting game. However, they decided to push their luck with King of Fighters 2003.
The King of Fighters 2003, also known by fans as the King of Fighters X or X, is a bittersweet title in the franchise. It was the last game released in the series for the Neo Geo family line of systems. However, it also marked a return of SNK to help develop the franchise. A new story arc titled Tales of Ash, which features a newcomer, Ash Crimson, began in the King of Fighters 2003. Again, the 3-on-3 battle team format is used, however it also uses a multi-shift format, which allows players to change characters in the middle of a fight. And why it took 10 entries for this feature to be added, I will never know, because this is something that is definitely welcomed, at least for my playing style personally. When the Change OK sign is displayed above the power gauge, the player can do a quick shift and change characters immediately, or perform a switch-off attack against the opponent that will consume 1 power gauge stock. The game also features a tactical leader system, in which one of the members of the team is designated as the leader. The chosen leader has access to an exclusive move, known as the Leader Special Move. However, this usually requires 2 power gauge stocks in order to be able to perform it. This game is somewhat of a black sheep in the franchise, and I've seen it having a lot of mixed reviews due to the major changes that were made in the regular gameplay that is commonly associated with the series. I personally feel like this is a step in the right direction, but it does feel a bit off in my opinion. At least I wasn't really able to get into it as much. This divide in the direction that the series was taking from 2002 to 2003 only emphasizes the point that I really feel like 2002 should have been the last game on this hardware. Because whenever they seem to introduce something new, in previous games it has taken at least one more game to get the format really solid. Fans and critics did agree that most of the issues presented in this game were fixed in the sequel, however that is where it ends for the Neo Geo line of hardware.
KO! You win!
So it appears that there is a cycle to these Neo Geo King of Fighters games. The first game was story-based driven, but it was the first game in the series. Then they had a 3-game story arc, and then a very awesome compilation game that they labeled as the Special Edition in '98. Then they had 3 more story-driven games, and then a very awesome compilation game. And if they were going to continue that cycle again, King of Fighters 2003 was actually fitting in with this tradition. They changed the gameplay concept, they wanted to introduce new ideas, keep the series moving forward, but it was a weak way to end things on the Neo Geo hardware, and I think it provides a very cheap experience, mainly because this was the last game on the Neo Geo hardware, and there would be nowhere for this story to go on that line of systems. It always seems like that it takes them another game or two for them to really perfect the changes that they make in the series and actually make them, in my opinion, acceptable. Unless they were going to continue past this game, I really feel like they should have just ended with 2002. Again, I feel like in my mind that would have been a perfect way to end things on this generation of hardware and move on to something that's more capable, even changing this from a 2D to a 3D fighter. So even though we've reached the end of the Neo Geo King of Fighters fighting games, we have not actually reached the end of the series. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happened after Neo Geo.
Well, they decided not to go in the direction of 3D and instead decided to keep the King of Fighters XI as a 2D fighting game. The game is once again produced by SNK Playmore, and it serves as the 11th in the series, following the King of Fighters 2003. When this game came out in arcades in 2005, it was released on the Atomus Wave platform, which was a custom arcade system board and cabinet produced by Sammy Corporation. It shared many similarities with Sega's Naomi cabinet, which served as the basis for the Sega Dreamcast. Just like the Neo Geo family of hardware and the Naomi, it uses removable game cartridges, and it also uses a removable module to change the controls. When they retired the MVS system, SNK Playmore decided to choose this platform to develop games for, and entered into a contract with Sammy to develop 5 games for the Atomus Wave system. The cabinet would feature a 200 MHz Hitachi 32-bit RISC CPU, along with a 100 MHz PowerVR2 graphics processor, capable of doing about 3 to 5 million polygons a second. However, this system would also be capable of doing 2D graphics as well, and the King of Fighters XI does see some graphical upgrades. Porting this game to the home market would take a more involved process than in the past, as their arcade hardware would be different from the home hardware that they would port the game to, and that is the PlayStation 2. This game would be released June 22, 2006 in Japan, but it wouldn't come out in Europe until July 6, 2007, over a year later, and didn't even hit the United States until November 13, 2007. I believe it is for this reason that many people didn't own the home version of this game. By November of 2007, the PlayStation 3 would have been on the market for over a year, as well as the Xbox 360 and the Wii. However, fans that did pick up this game were in for a treat. This game retains the gameplay elements from the King of Fighters 2003, involving fights between 6 characters who can tag between members during battle. It also provides new features which allow the player to perform simultaneous multiple special moves. This game is noted as bringing 4 substantial innovations to the King of Fighters franchise.
The King of Fighters XI.
Those are Quick Shift, which allows the players to change into another character in the middle of any combo, prolonging it, or in the middle of any attack. Shaving Shift, which allows the player to take out a character when they are being hit, or as soon as they are hit, at the cost of both skill bars. The skill bars themselves were a new feature. And the last one would be the Dream Cancel. Like the Super Cancel that appeared in the King of Fighters 99, Dream Cancel allows players to use stocks to interrupt a move in the midst of its execution with a more powerful move, allowing for devastating combos. If time runs out during a match, the winner is no longer decided based on remaining life. Instead, the Judgment Bar, a new circular bar composed of 2 colors, each one representing a different player, will quantify each player's skill. If none of the 2 teams manage to win by defeating all 3 characters in the opposing team, the placement of the Judgment Bar will decide who the victor is. In the very rare case that the match ends without showing any favor on either side of the Judgment Bar, the match will end in a draw and both sides will lose. The home version on the PlayStation 2 added multiple modes not present in the arcade version. The player can use the original King of Fighters team mode, where characters are not randomly tagged, and instead fight in an order determined by the player. In Challenge mode, the player is given multiple missions, where they can unlock a total of 7 characters from Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. There is also an Edit mode where the player can alter the appearance of each character and give them different colors, such as making Kaio shoot green flames instead of red. This game was received fairly positive by gamers and critics alike. I've seen it around a 7 or an 8 out of 10, but I would actually range this more towards the lower 7, possibly even a 6 out of 10. And I think that comes down to me on the very dated visual style this game has. I feel like the PlayStation 2 version lacks the charm of the Neo Geo's graphics, and I found it odd that they chose to make the default graphics mode on the sprites here to be more softened and blurred than sharp. I have played this both on a CRT and on a flat panel display using an upscaler, and the softened sprite mode just looks out of place with these sharp backgrounds every single time. So while some people may prefer it this way, I personally did not. And I think that's what led a lot of publications and gamers to start complaining a bit more about the graphics in the game. Overall, I feel like this game looks like it could have been done on the Neo Geo with maybe slight improvements to the backgrounds, but the sprites themselves and animation frames all look the same. One gaming publication even went so far as to say that this game would not stand out among other fighting game franchises like Soul Calibur or Tekken, specifically because they refused to upgrade things to 3D. And while I do feel like that was a missed opportunity, I almost have to say that after playing so many King of Fighters games, it almost wouldn't seem like a King of Fighters game if it wasn't this 2D pixel art sprite-based fighting game. However, looking at this game through a modern lens, some have regarded this game as one of the best entries in the franchise, noting that the background's quality are at a higher level than previous entries in the series, and the gameplay and quick load times compared to the original arcade game are a much welcome feature. Overall, if you're a fan of the PlayStation 2, or a fan of this series, I would definitely recommend a pickup on the PlayStation 2. It's not necessarily rare, as when I look up sales of this, it says they've sold around 190,000 copies worldwide. but if the game does become in demand, I could see the value exceeding its worth.
You win!
もううんざりなんだよ。
To be honest, after King of Fighters 2003 left me wanting more, I was very curious how they were going to continue that story arc, or at least that gameplay style, into the next game, so I ended up getting King of Fighters XI for the PlayStation 2. So even though the box art to this is reproduced in black and white, it is an original game disc. I just wanted to let you guys see that. But as I suspected, this game improves upon all of my complaints with the King of Fighters 2003. Again, I really feel like they should have changed the numbering system with that game and started with that game on a different system than the Neo Geo. Now, while I think the King of Fighters XI is a good game, I don't think I've met a lot of people who even knew this thing came out for a home console here in North America. Even fans of this system, when they were growing up, claimed that, well, this game came out way too late for them to get it for the PlayStation 2. Because here in North America, this game came out in 2007. That was after the PlayStation 3 had been launched, and the Wii and the Xbox 360 were out, so we were looking for something released on those systems as well, and in fact, we would get 2 of them.
The King of Fighters XII hit arcades on April 10th of 2009 worldwide, and it came out for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 that July. The world got its first glimpse of the gameplay on February 14th of 2008 at the Arcade Operators Union Amusement Expo, or AOU, and many were pleased with the direction they were going with this game, as they showcased new, much larger, and higher resolution sprites.
The King of Fighters XII.
SNK staff working on the game decided to create new graphics during 2005 and 2006, commenting that they spent more than triple the amount of time to develop the graphics for this game. As the game would get a complete graphical overhaul, all the sprites used in the previous games for the last 10 years were dropped and replaced with new high-definition sprites. The programmers stated that their goal was to create the ultimate 2D fighting game. In terms of gameplay, King of Fighters XII uses the usual 3-on-3 system, with each fight consisting of up to 5 rounds. However, the tactical shift system from the King of Fighters 2003 was removed. This game also introduces the critical counter system. During a match, a bar beneath the player's vitality will fill, and when it is full, a player lands a strong punch as a counter. The character enters into critical counter mode when the player has a short amount of time, during which their character can link multiple attacks together. The new guard attack feature allows a fighter to intercept and hit an incoming opponent's strike damage-free. And finally, there's also a clash system in place, where every time characters land blows on one another with match timing, the engine will generate a break effect and push the characters away from each other into a neutral standing position. Just like in King of Fighters 98 and King of Fighters 2002, this game does not contain a storyline, allowing the return of several characters depending on their status in the series. Also, there are no official teams in this game, leaving the player to create any team to use that they want. Players can still dash, backstep, and perform rolls as they evade, and the guard breaks from previous games in the series can now be done at any time. When porting this game to a home system, SNK Playmore decided to use the PlayStation 3 instead of the PlayStation 2, as it would not have been able to handle the new graphics from the game. That, and at the time of 2009, the PlayStation 2 was becoming less and less popular. Gaming developer Ignition Entertainment would handle the home port, and the game would include additional features not found in the arcade version, such as more playable characters and different types of bonus modes. Reception of this game was received slightly less than King of Fighters XI, with reviews ranging between 5 and 6 out of 10. Many reviewers praised some of the graphical upgrades, however some were also disappointed that the game abandoned the previous art style, hiring a new artist to create new high-resolution pixel art. One reviewer in particular stated that this game seemed like a reboot, and a seemingly unfinished one. Some were upset about some of the features from King of Fighters XI being removed, but many were heavily critical of the online play mode, which was deemed almost unplayable by many critics. Reviewers noted that other games that were out at the time, such as Street Fighter IV and BlazBlue Calamity Trigger, would be more entertaining than this game. However, I feel this is a strong enough entry in the series, but it's not one that I personally enjoyed as much. Again, I kind of feel like this game is more of a generic fighter rather than a King of Fighters game. I definitely appreciate the graphical upgrades over the PlayStation 2 version. However, it feels to me that they should have taken a bit more time to polish the game up a little bit more and improve a little bit on the gameplay. Overall, I would say that this is not an essential game to pick up if you're a fan of the King of Fighters. The King of Fighters XIII came out the following year in 2010 in the arcades. Again, it made its way to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in late 2011. This game is actually a direct sequel to the King of Fighters XI and is the conclusion of Ash Crimson's story arc, which started all the way back in the King of Fighters 2003.
The King of Fighters XIII.
The King of Fighters XIII removes some of the gameplay system features used in the last game, notably the guard attack, the critical counter, the class system, as well as the dynamic zooming camera. In their place, 3 new features were added. First was the new EX mode, which converts each character's super move into more powerful versions. There's also the hyperdrive mode, which gives the player unlimited use of drive cancels once the hyperdrive gauge has been maxed out. And the last of the features in the game is the drive cancel, which opens up new combo possibilities. This game also marks the return of the multi-bar power gauge that was introduced in the King of Fighters 97. Known video game publisher Atlas would publish the home version on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. The home version would feature various new arenas, some of them being originally from the Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury series. The others are based on places briefly seen in cutscenes from the King of Fighters itself. All of the characters had their movesets adjusted for a better balance as a response to issues found with the arcade version. Downloadable content was also made available, including variants of existing characters. The King of Fighters XIII received a much better reception than its predecessor, with GameSpot awarding it the Best Fighting Game of the Year as well as the Most Improved Sequel. Critics and game publications noted that it seemed that SNK was listening to the responses from their fans, as it seemed that almost every single criticism of the last game was fixed or improved upon in this version. In my personal opinion, this is the best fighting game yet out of the post-Neo Geo hardware games. For some reason, the PlayStation 3 copy seems to sell for a bit more than the Xbox 360 copy, but it shouldn't be too hard to find one of these games out there. And if you own an Xbox One or a Series X, as of the making of this video, you can still download a digital copy for cheaper than buying a physical copy.
The King of Fighters XIV.
And now that brings us to the most current King of Fighters, King of Fighters XIV. This game marks a major departure from all King of Fighters games that preceded it. First, it came out on home consoles before it came out in arcades. And unlike the previous 13 games in the series, they would abandon the 2D raster imagery, and instead this game is rendered entirely in 3D. This game was initially released exclusively on the PlayStation 4 and was eventually ported to Microsoft Windows PCs and Japanese arcade cabinets the following year. Development of the King of Fighters XIV began in April of 2014 after SNK CEO reoriented the company towards traditional video games after several years of focus on arcade machines and mobile apps. In terms of gameplay, it retains the series system of teams composed of 3 fighters, while introducing rush combos, which are an automatic combo system designed to make the series accessible for new players. And overall, this game has received generally favorable reviews since its release. Critics praise the game's fighting system as enjoyable for both new players and fighting game experts, but criticized its graphics as inferior to other fighting games released during the console generation. Overall, I've seen this game rated between 8 and 9 out of 10, and I would say that's where it ranks for me, as I feel like this game is a step in the right direction to modernizing this franchise. Though I thoroughly enjoyed the pixel artwork on the Neo Geo hardware, I feel like every console since has been inferior to the originals. I usually find that for me personally, I appreciate the pixel artwork of the 16-bit and 32-bit generation more than I do on modern systems. It's been neat to see what some games can do with that art style on more capable systems, but for most modern games, I find myself enjoying the games more when I feel like they're taking full advantage of the hardware. Overall, I do like the King of Fighters XIV, and I feel like that if nobody has played one before, this would be a good one I would recommend to start with. And if they like the game and want to see some of its origins, I would recommend some on the Neo Geo hardware before I'd recommend any other console.
One more to go! Player 2 wins!
After playing all of the games on the Neo Geo, playing these newer games is a bit strange to me, actually. This doesn't feel as much like King of Fighters because of how long they stuck with that same format, being on hardware that could only do 2D graphics. And to tell you the truth, until I decided to do this video, I actually didn't own any of these games past the Neo Geo, but after playing them all on the Neo Geo, I felt like I had to experience what was next in this game series. What could they do more than what they had already done? And yes, the last game that we have in this series so far is King of Fighters XIV, and I haven't got a chance to play this game as much as the other ones, to be quite honest, so I can't really form a concrete opinion of it. But the next generation is upon us, and yes, King of Fighters XV is scheduled to come out, I believe, early next year in 2022.
As of the making of this video, this game is scheduled to be released on February 17th, 2022 for Microsoft Windows, the PS4, PS5, and the Xbox Series X and S. SNK decided to use Unreal Engine 4 to make this game, and the game is to feature a story that picks up right after King of Fighters XIV. The game is set to launch with 13 teams of 39 playable fighters, with 6 planned as paid DLC in the future.
The King of Fighters 15!
So overall, what are my thoughts on the King of Fighters on the Neo Geo? I think that this game series is quite excellent. In fact, if you look through this, everybody who likes fighting games should be able to pick at least one of these games and say, I could play that.
Overall, just focusing on the King of Fighters games that made an appearance on Neo Geo hardware, I would say that my personal favorite would still be King of Fighters 98. And that is a game that I see constantly at the top of fans' and critics' favorite lists. King of Fighters 2002 is another personal favorite of mine that I would recommend separate, but those are the only 2 out of this list that I would recommend as essential collecting. For the more hardcore gaming fans, I think that if you picked the end of each story arc, so King of Fighters 97 and King of Fighters 2001, I think you would enjoy those more, as it seems like they worked out the battle systems of those story arcs to perfection in their final outings. And because I have King of Fighters 94 in my personal collection, I would also say that if you wanted to see how the series got its start, it is cheap enough to collect, and I think that a lot of people would have fun seeing where the series got its origins, although I don't think that gameplay is up to snuff, as they were able to perfect things in later games. In my opinion, I think that SNK did a very good job of improving the game by constantly listening to their fans' feedback. And it's surprising to me on a series that I at first glance thought was just going to be a generic fighting game that they just kept pushing on you year after year. Upon examining each game, I was pleasantly surprised to find something unique in several of the games, and honestly, I feel like the games just kept getting better as they went along, and thanks to their innovations on several different games, I didn't really feel that this format was getting stale, even though I played through, so far, 14 of these games. And again, this is coming from someone who doesn't really enjoy playing these games when I'm only playing it single player. As with all fighting games, I think that your enjoyment will be enhanced by playing it 2-player or versus, and I feel like you can pop in any of these games and find something you like about each one. Adding in the games since the Neo Geo hardware, I don't find these entries as charming as the original, but to tell you the truth, I think that these are going in the right direction because once they upgraded to 3D, I was actually a big fan of King of Fighters XIV, and I'm looking forward to seeing what King of Fighters XV can offer on top of this. I noted that I wasn't really too much into the story, the plot, the lore, or the characters in the game, mainly focusing on the gameplay in this video, but there are a ton of characters, each with their own backstories and rivalries within the King of Fighters tournament. The first game in the series actually introduces the initial main character of the series, Kaio, who is a young Japanese fighter who is the heir to a powerful group of martial artists having pyrokinetic abilities. Kaio fights against the Kusanagi clan enemies, his rival Yori, and the snake demon Orochi and his human followers, among others, in the first 4 games of the series. The King of Fighters 99 introduced a new story arc around Kei, a young man who seeks to destroy the mysterious Nests organization, and that story arc resolved in the King of Fighters 2001. The King of Fighters 2003 introduced a new character named Ash Crimson, and a new group of antagonists, known as those from the past, also appears in the series. They want to obtain Orochi's power for the purpose of giving it to their unknown master. There could be another whole video series devoted to the lore and characters of the King of Fighters series, but instead of describing them for you in this video, I figured it would be better for you to experience this story for yourself, and I don't want to spoil anything if you want to play through the King of Fighters series.
That said, that is going to wrap things up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please click on that like button. Also, leave a comment below. Let me know what you liked about today's video. Let me know in the comments below which one of the King of Fighters game is your personal favorite, and what did I get wrong in this review. If you're interested in seeing more about the Neo Geo line of systems, I do have the Ultimate Neo Geo review on my channel. The link for it should be down in the description below. Again, I want to thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned because I have more content coming, and I will see you all in the next video.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.